The camera-ready smile dropped the second the heavy oak door clicked shut. The bride-to-be swapped the fresh ice water for a cup of tepid dregs. The sick woman choked, and the future mafia queen just laughed, but a shadow breathed in the closet, and the maid was about to light the match. The bedroom smelled of bleach, lavender, and the undeniable metallic scent of decay. Nora hated the lavender most. It was a cheap, synthetic aerosol spray the estate manager bought in bulk to mask the reality of what this room was, a gilded hospice. She wrung out the sponge over the porcelain basin. The hot water turned murky gray. Her own hands were cracked, the skin around her cuticles peeling from a relentless cycle of ammonia and scrubbing. In the center of the sprawling, velvet-draped room lay Beatrice Russo. Once the matriarch of the most feared syndicate in the tri-state area, she was now just 80 pounds of brittle bones and translucent skin anchored to a mechanical bed. A stroke had stolen her speech. A subsequent degenerative disease was slowly stealing the rest. Nora moved to the bedside, her rubber-soled shoes completely silent on the Persian rug. That was her job. Silence. Invisibility. She was paid $2,000 a week in unbanded $100 bills to wipe spit from the chin of a Mafia Boss's mother and pretend she didn't hear the muffled screams coming from the basement every other Thursday. "All right, Mrs. Russo," Nora murmured, her voice flat, gravelly from a morning of chain smoking on the back terrace. "Let's get this crust off." Beatrice's eyes, milky and sunken, flicked toward Nora. There was a desperate, trapped intelligence in those irises. A ghost rattling the bars of a cage. Nora took a warm, damp cloth and gently dabbed at the corners of the older woman's mouth. The skin felt like wet tissue paper. One wrong move and it would tear. Nora felt a flicker of pity, but she smothered it quickly. Pity was expensive. Pity got you fired. Or worse, it got you noticed by Dominic Russo. The heavy mahogany doors swung open without a knock. The air in the room shifted instantly, the synthetic lavender overpowered by the cloying, aggressive scent of Tom Ford tuberose and stale Prosecco. Chloe stepped in. She wore a silk slip dress that cost more than Nora's annual rent, her blonde hair blown out into a cascade of effortless, calculated waves. She held a crystal glass of sparkling water, the ice clinking violently as her manicured fingers gripped it too tight. "Is she decent?" Chloe asked, not looking at Nora. She never looked at Nora. To Chloe, the maid was part of the furniture, a mop with a heartbeat. "Yes, miss," Nora said, stepping back, instantly retreating to the shadows by the towering armoire. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the scuff mark on her left shoe. Chloe walked to the edge of the bed. She pulled out her phone. The screen illuminated her sharp, symmetrical face. "Dominic wants an update. He's stuck in meetings at the docks." She leaned down. Instantly, the cold, bored expression on Chloe's face melted into a mask of pure, angelic devotion. She placed a gentle hand over Beatrice's withered one. She smiled, radiant and heartbreaking. She snapped a selfie, the angle perfectly capturing her fake sorrow and the frail matriarch behind her. Nora watched the performance with a dull ache in her stomach. It was flawless. The internet loved Chloe. The tabloids called her the angel of the underworld, the sweet philanthropic heiress taming the city's most dangerous man. Dominic believed it too. When Dominic was in the room, Chloe fed Beatrice broth with the patience of a saint. She read her poetry. She cried softly into Dominic's chest about how unfair life was. The second the camera clicked, Chloe dropped Beatrice's hand like it was diseased. The smile vanished. The muscles in her jaw ticked. "God, it reeks in here," Chloe muttered, stepping away and wiping her palm on her silk dress. Did she soil herself again? "It smells like a nursing home." "I just bathed her, miss," Nora said quietly from the corner. Chloe shot a glare toward the shadows. "I didn't ask for an inventory. I asked a rhetorical question. Open a damn window and turn up the AC. I'm sweating." Nora moved to the heavy drapes, pulling them back just enough to crack the window. The humid summer air pushed in, doing nothing to help the temperature, but Nora wasn't about to argue. She needed this job. Her younger sister needed insulin, and the pharmacy didn't take IOUs. Behind her, she heard the scrape of a wooden chair. Chloe sat next to the bed. "Thirsty, Beatrice?" Chloe's voice had dropped its syrupy pitch. It was low now, scratching with irritation. Beatrice made a small, wet clicking sound in her throat. She blinked twice. Yes. Chloe held up the crystal glass. The ice clinked. Condensation dripped down her diamond engagement ring. She brought the rim of the glass to Beatrice's dry, cracked lips, but she didn't tip it. Nora froze by the window, her hand gripping the velvet curtain. Chloe just held the glass there, touching the old woman's lips, letting the freezing condensation bead against the chapped skin, but refusing to let a single drop of water flow into the dry mouth. Beatrice's breathing hitched, a pathetic, hollow wheeze. Her jaw trembled as she tried to lean her head forward, fighting the paralysis, trying to reach the water. "Ah," Chloe whispered. She pulled the glass back an inch. "Don't be greedy. Dominic isn't here to coddle you. Do you know how long I've been dealing with wedding planners this morning? Do you know how exhausting it is to pretend to care about your dietary restrictions?" Nora swallowed hard. The spit in her throat felt like glass. "Don't look," she told herself. "Just clean the baseboards. Look away." She knelt on the rug and took a dry rag from her apron, aggressively polishing a spot on the mahogany trim that was already shining. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Chloe took a slow sip of the icy water herself, right in front of the paralyzed woman. She let out a soft, satisfied sigh. "Much better. You don't really need this, do you? You're practically on a drip anyway. It just makes more work for the help." Chloe stood up, bored of the game. She set the half-empty glass on the nightstand, just out of Beatrice's reach. "Keep her quiet," Chloe snapped at Nora as she walked past, the draft of her dress kicking up the smell of tuberose. "I have a migraine." The door slammed shut. Nora stayed on the floor for 10 long seconds. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. She heard Beatrice whimpering a wet, pathetic sound, like a dog trapped under a porch. Nora hated herself. She hated the weakness in her own spine. She hated that she prioritized a stack of dirty cash over basic human decency. Slowly, she pushed herself up. She walked to the nightstand, picked up the glass of water, and slid her arm beneath Beatrice's neck to support her head. "Here," Nora whispered roughly, tipping the glass. "Drink it slowly." Beatrice swallowed greedily, water spilling down her chin. Nora wiped it away with the cloth. When Beatrice finally stopped drinking, she looked up at Nora. A tear leaked from the corner of the old woman's eye, tracking through the deep wrinkles toward her ear. Nora looked away. "Don't," she muttered. "I'm no better than she is. I just watched her do it." 2 days later, the atmosphere in the estate tightened like a piano wire. Dominic Russo was supposedly leaving for Montreal. There was a dispute over a shipping route, something involving dock worker unions and broken kneecaps. Nora didn't ask questions. She just observed the chaos of the packing. Armed men in tailored suits paced the foyer, their leather shoes clicking ominously on the marble. Dominic came into the bedroom to say goodbye. Nora was folding towels in the adjoining bathroom. The door cracked open just enough to see the reflection in the vanity mirror. Dominic was a terrifyingly large man. He didn't have the slick, polished look of a movie gangster. He looked like a quarry worker who had somehow amassed a fortune. Broad shoulders, a thick, scarred neck, and eyes the color of dirty ice. He moved with a heavy, deliberate slowness that commanded absolute silence from everyone in his orbit. He knelt by his mother's bed. The immense, violent man suddenly looked incredibly fragile. He pressed his forehead against Beatrice's frail hand. "I have to go, Ma." His voice was a low rumble, thick with exhaustion. 3 days, maybe 4. I'm leaving 2 guards on the door. Chloe is going to stay home and look after you. She promised to cancel her fittings. In the mirror, Nora saw Chloe standing by the doorway, her hands clasped to her chest in a picture of wifely devotion. "Take all the time you need, baby. She's safe with me. I'll barely leave her side." Dominic stood up, walked over to Chloe, and kissed her forehead. "You're an angel, Chloe. I don't know what I'd do without you." "I love you," she purred. He left. The massive front doors of the estate thudded shut a few minutes later, followed by the crunch of heavy tires on the gravel driveway. The second the engine noise faded, Chloe dropped the act. She let out a loud, dramatic groan. Kicking off her heels, they smacked against the antique dresser. Finally, she hissed, "God, I thought he was never going to leave." Chloe looked at Beatrice. The old woman's eyes were wide, tracking the fiancé with a primal, instinctual fear. "Don't look at me like that, you old bat," Chloe sneered. "We have 3 whole days together, and I am not spending them smelling your bedpans." Nora stayed in the bathroom. She held a stack of white towels so tightly her knuckles were white. Her breath felt shallow. She knew it was going to get worse. Without Dominic's looming presence to keep her in check, Chloe's mask would completely slip. But there was something else. Later that evening, the house was dead quiet. Chloe was downstairs in the parlor, drinking gin and screaming at a wedding vendor over the phone. Nora was on the late shift, assigned to administer Beatrice's evening medication and adjust her pillows to prevent bed sores. The bedroom was dimly lit, just one amber lamp glowing on the desk. Nora moved mechanically. She turned Beatrice onto her left side, wedging a foam cushion against her back. The old woman groaned. "I know," Nora whispered, smoothing the sheets. "I know it hurts." As she tucked the blankets around Beatrice's feet, Nora paused. A draft. The windows were sealed tight. The central air conditioning vents were on the ceiling, blowing downward. But Nora felt a distinct cold draft brush against her ankles. It was coming from the massive walk-in closet, a space the size of a small apartment, lined with custom cedar shelving, connecting Beatrice's room to an unused study. Nora frowned. She walked slowly toward the closet door, which was left slightly ajar. As she got closer, a smell hit her. It wasn't the cedar of the shelves. It wasn't the stale lavender spray. It was bergamot. Bergamot, expensive cigar smoke, and the faint, harsh tang of gun oil. Nora's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She stopped breathing. She knew that smell. It was ingrained in the fabric of the house. It was Dominic's smell. She stood frozen, 3 feet from the crack in the closet door. The lights inside were off, pitch black, but as she stared into the sliver of darkness, she saw it. A faint, nearly imperceptible shift in the shadows. The sound of a heavy, leather-soled shoe shifting its weight on the hardwood floor. A single, muted creak. He didn't leave. The realization crashed into her with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't in Montreal. He was in the closet. Why? To test his guards? To hide from a hitman? No. Nora looked back at the bed. She looked at the door leading to the hallway. Dominic was a paranoid man, but he wasn't a coward. If he was hiding in his mother's closet, there was only one reason. He suspected something. He was watching. Panic seized Nora's throat. How long had he been in there? Did he have a camera? A microphone? What had he seen? He had seen Nora being complicit. He had seen her stand quietly in the corner while Chloe tortured his mother. If Dominic found out Nora knew and did nothing, he wouldn't just fire her. People who crossed Dominic Russo ended up buried in the foundations of the new commercial high-rises downtown. Nora backed away from the closet door, her hands trembling so violently she had to shove them into her apron pockets. She turned back to the bed. Beatrice was looking at her, confused by Nora's sudden stillness. "Time to sleep," Nora managed to choke out, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't look at the closet again. She turned off the amber lamp and fled the room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The next morning, the heat wave broke, replaced by a suffocating, muggy pressure. The sky outside the bedroom windows was the color of a bruised plum, swollen with unreleased rain. Inside, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Nora hadn't slept. Her eyes were bloodshot, her uniform slightly rumpled. She kept stealing glances at the closet door. It was closed now, but she knew. She could feel the heavy, violent gravity of the man waiting on the other side. At 10 a.m., Chloe kicked the bedroom door open. She looked a mess. The immaculate blowout was frizzy, her eyes smudged with yesterday's mascara. She was nursing a severe hangover, holding a steaming porcelain bowl in one hand and her phone in the other. "Nora," Chloe barked, "why is it so hot in here?" "The AC in this wing is struggling with the humidity, miss," Nora said, her voice shaking slightly. She positioned herself near the foot of the bed. She was hyper-aware of the closet door just 20 feet away. Chloe groaned, walking over to the bedside table and slamming the bowl down. Some of the liquid sloshed over the rim. It was chicken broth, heated to a near boil. Plumes of steam rose from the surface. "Wake her up," Chloe commanded, massaging her temples. "The doctor said she needs protein, and if she loses another pound, Dominic is going to blame me. Sit her up." Nora moved to the controls, elevating the top half of the mechanical bed. Beatrice's head lolled forward, her eyes opening slowly. She looked at the steaming bowl and shrank back into the pillows. "Don't give me that look," Chloe snapped, picking up the bowl and a silver spoon. "You're going to eat it, and you're going to keep it down, or so help me God, I will leave you sitting in your own filth until tomorrow." Nora's stomach twisted. She looked at the closet. It was utterly still, not a sound. "Step out," Nora thought frantically. "Step out right now. Stop her." But the door didn't move. Dominic was waiting. He was waiting to see how far Chloe would go, and he was waiting to see what Nora would do. Chloe scooped up a spoonful of the broth. It was clearly too hot. The steam was rising in thick ribbons. She didn't blow on it. She didn't test it on her wrist. She just shoved the spoon toward Beatrice's face. Beatrice turned her head away, her mouth clamped shut. She let out a frantic, muffled moan of protest. "Open your mouth!" Chloe yelled, her voice shrill, echoing off the high ceilings. The hangover had shredded whatever thin veil of patience she possessed. "I am not doing this today. Open it." Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut and shook her head weakly. "Fine, be a stubborn old bitch." Chloe's eyes flashed with a vicious, ugly light. Instead of forcing the spoon into Beatrice's mouth, Chloe deliberately tilted the silver spoon downward, right over Beatrice's exposed collarbone. A few drops of the boiling broth splashed onto the fragile, paper-thin skin. Beatrice let out a sharp, choked gasp. It wasn't a scream. She didn't have the breath for a scream, but it was a sound of pure, agonizing shock. Her frail body convulsed, her working arm flailing up to claw at her chest, her eyes wide with pain and terror. The smell of the broth, savory and greasy, mixed sickeningly with the sweat in the room. Chloe smiled, a small, cruel smirk. "Oh, I'm sorry. Was that hot? Maybe if you stopped thrashing around, accidents wouldn't happen." She scooped another spoonful, deliberately hovering it over Beatrice's face this time. "Now, open." Something inside Nora snapped. It wasn't a heroic surge of bravery. It wasn't a cinematic moment of righteous fury. It was a raw, ugly, visceral snap of a wire that had been pulled too tight for too long. She was terrified of the man in the closet. She was terrified of losing her paycheck. But the sound of that choked gasp, the sight of the red welt forming instantly on the old woman's chest, it bypassed her logic and hit her straight in the gut. Nora didn't speak. She moved. She lunged forward, her rubber shoes squeaking violently against the hardwood. She slammed her hand into Chloe's wrist. The silver spoon flew across the room, clattering against the wall. The bowl of hot broth jerked, splashing over Chloe's silk top and onto the floor. "What the fuck?" Chloe shrieked, stumbling backward, dropping the bowl entirely. It shattered on the floor tiles near the rug. Chloe stared at Nora, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. "Have you lost your fucking mind? I'll have you killed. Do you know who I am?" Nora was breathing heavily, her chest heaving. She didn't back down. She stepped between Chloe and the bed, positioning her own body as a shield. She looked at Chloe, her voice coming out in a rough, shaking rasp. "You burned her." Nora's hands were trembling so hard she clenched them into fists at her sides. "You burned her on purpose. I've watched you starve her. I've watched you pinch her. But I am not going to stand here and watch you scald a paralyzed woman." "You insignificant piece of trash," Chloe spat, wiping the hot broth off her shirt, her eyes venomous. You are nothing. You are a mop. When Dominic gets back, I'm going to tell him you attacked me. I'm going to tell him you've been abusing his mother. He will strip the flesh from your bones." Nora's heart hammered a frantic, terrified beat. She knew Chloe was right. It would be the polished fiancé's word against the invisible maids. Unless... Nora slowly turned her head, looking directly at the heavy cedar door of the walk-in closet. "He doesn't have to wait to get back," Nora said, her voice echoing in the sudden ringing silence of the room. She kept her eyes fixed on the dark wood of the door. "Does he?" Chloe stopped wiping her shirt. She frowned, following Nora's gaze. "What are you babbling about?" For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. Only the sound of Beatrice's ragged, terrified breathing. Then, the brass handle of the closet door slowly depressed with a heavy, metallic click. Chloe froze. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. The door swung open. The hinges didn't creak. The shadows in the closet seemed to bleed out into the bedroom, pulling the ambient light down with them. Dominic Russo stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore dark slacks and a black t-shirt that stretched tight across his chest. He looked bigger than he had 2 days ago. He looked like a monolith. His face was completely, utterly blank. No anger, no rage. Just a terrifying, hollow emptiness. He held a silenced pistol in his right hand, the metal dull and cold. He let it hang casually at his side, as if it were merely an extension of his arm. The smell of bergamot and gun oil flooded the hot room. Chloe let out a pathetic, whimpering squeak. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor, the shards of the broken porcelain bowl biting into her bare legs. She didn't seem to notice the pain. "Dominic," Chloe gasped, her voice barely a whisper, tears instantly flooding her eyes. "Dominic, baby, listen to me. It's not. She's lying. The maid, she..." Dominic didn't look at Chloe. He didn't look at the gun. He looked at Nora. His dead, icy eyes locked onto the trembling, exhausted maid, standing defensively in front of his mother's bed. He stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Nora felt her knees shaking, her bladder threatening to let go. She had ruined the woman he loved. She had exposed a betrayal he might not have wanted to see. Dominic slowly raised his free hand. He pointed a single, thick finger at Nora. "You," Dominic's voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. "Step away from the bed, go to the kitchen, and wait for me." The stainless steel island in the kitchen felt like a morgue slab. Nora sat on a stool, her knees pulled tight to her chest. The industrial refrigerator hummed a low, vibrating drone that rattled her teeth. Her apron was stained with cold chicken broth. She smelled like fear, sour sweat, and adrenaline. She didn't run. Running meant they hunted you. Running meant they found her sister's apartment in the Heights. So she waited. Upstairs, the house was a tomb. There were no gunshots, no screams. That was the most terrifying part. A man like Dominic Russo didn't need noise to dismantle a life. The silence was heavy, pressing down on the kitchen ceiling like a physical weight. Nora stared at the second hand of the wall clock. 10 minutes. 20. She noticed a stray crumb of toast near the edge of the counter. She brushed it into her hand, gripping it so tightly the sharp edge bit into her palm. The pain grounded her. Then, the kitchen door swung open. Dominic stepped over the threshold. He didn't have the gun anymore. He walked to the sink, turned the faucet to cold, and began washing his hands. He scrubbed them with a harsh, generic dish soap, the harsh lather scraping against his thick knuckles. He rinsed them thoroughly, turning off the water with a sharp squeak of the faucet handle. He dried his hands on a dish towel, tossed it onto the counter. Only then did he look at Nora. "You're shaking," he said. It wasn't a question or an expression of concern. It was an observation of a fact, like noting the weather. "Am I going to die?" Nora asked. Her voice cracked. She hated how small she sounded. Dominic pulled a heavy wooden chair out from the staff dining table and sat. He leaned his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor tiles. The smell of bergamot was gone, replaced by the faint, coppery tang of rust and exertion. "No," he said quietly. Nora let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her vision blurred for a second. "Where is she?" Nora whispered. Dominic lifted his head. His eyes, the color of dirty ice, locked onto hers. Chloe had an abrupt change of itinerary. She realized city life was detrimental to her health. She won't be coming back. It was a neat, sanitized lie. The kind of lie you told to keep the police from digging up the basement. Nora swallowed the bile rising in her throat. She nodded once. "I stood in that closet for 48 hours, Dominic said. His voice was completely flat, drained of any emotion. "I pissed in a plastic bottle. I didn't sleep. I just listened." He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. "I heard her complain about the smell of my mother. I heard her taking photos. I heard her drinking the water she was denying a dying woman." He looked back at Nora. The intensity in his gaze pinned her to the stool. "And I heard you," he continued. "I heard you sneaking water to her when Chloe left the room. I watched you turn her over so she wouldn't get sores. You did it quietly. You didn't do it to get caught or to get a bonus. You were terrified of my fiancé, but you did it anyway." Nora looked down at her lap. "I needed this job. I have a sister. She has type 1 diabetes. I couldn't afford to get fired." "And yet," Dominic said softly, "you threw a bowl of boiling broth at the woman who was about to become my wife." "She burned her," Nora said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The memory of the red welt on Beatrice's collarbone flared in her mind. "She burned her on purpose. I couldn't. I just couldn't watch it anymore." Dominic stared at her for a long time. The refrigerator compressor clicked off, plunging the kitchen into a suffocating quiet. "Most people in this house are paid to look the other way," Dominic said. "My guards, my lawyers, even my mother's doctor. They all knew Chloe was a sociopath. They saw the bruises, they saw the dehydration. They chose to be blind because it was profitable." He stood up. He walked slowly around the stainless steel island, stopping right next to Nora. The sheer size of him blocked out the overhead fluorescent lights. "You're a maid," he said. "You sweep the floors. You clean the toilets. But you were the only one who put yourself between my mother and a monster." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it onto the counter next to Nora. It hit the steel with a heavy, muffled thud. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Severance," Dominic said, "for your current position." Nora's stomach dropped. He wasn't going to kill her, but he was throwing her back into the street. Back to the unpaid pharmacy bills and the eviction notices. "Please, Mr. Russo, I need the work. I won't say a word about—" "You aren't a maid anymore." Dominic cut her off. His voice brokered absolutely no argument. "You're done scrubbing baseboards. Tomorrow morning you're moving into the guest wing." Nora stared at him, utterly confused. "The guest wing? My mother is fragile. She's surrounded by vultures," Dominic said, looking toward the ceiling, in the direction of the master bedroom. "I need someone in this house whose loyalty isn't bought, but proven. You're going to manage her care. You hire the nurses. You fire them. You oversee every meal, every medication, every visitor." Nora's mind spun. "I don't have medical training. I don't need a doctor." "I have doctors," Dominic said harshly. "I need a guard dog. I need the woman who isn't afraid to throw boiling water at a threat." He looked back down at her. "Your sister's medical expenses are handled. Her rent is paid. From now on, you work directly for me. You protect my mother. If someone looks at her wrong, you come to me. Do you understand?" Nora looked at the thick envelope on the counter. It was a lifeline. It was a golden ticket, but it was also a collar. By accepting it, she was stepping over the invisible line between the hired help and the syndicate itself. She would be eating food bought with blood money. She would be complicit. She thought of her sisters shaking hands during a low blood sugar crash. She thought of the red welt on Beatrice's chest. Nora placed her cracked, peeling hand over the envelope. "I understand," she said. 3 weeks later, the house smelled different. The synthetic lavender was gone, replaced by the faint, clean scent of eucalyptus and the sharp tang of medical-grade sanitation. The sprawling estate felt less like a tomb and more like a fortress. Nora stood by the large bay windows in Beatrice's room. She wasn't wearing a gray uniform anymore. She wore a simple, tailored black dress. Her hair was pulled back into a neat, severe knot. The cracks on her hands were healing, massaged daily with expensive ointment she found in her new private bathroom. She held a tablet, scrolling through the background checks of 2 new night nurses. On the bed, Beatrice was resting comfortably. The mechanical whir of a top-tier respiratory machine filled the silence. Beatrice looked different too. Her hair was brushed. Her skin, while still frail, looked hydrated. The heavy oak doors opened. Nora didn't flinch this time. 2 large men in suits stepped into the room. They didn't look at Nora. They stood by the door, hands folded in front of them. A moment later, Dominic walked in. He carried a small, leather-bound notebook. He walked to the bedside and leaned down, pressing his forehead to his mother's hand. Beatrice's eyes opened. They were still trapped, still unable to communicate, but the frantic animal terror was gone. "Hey, Ma," Dominic whispered. Nora watched them from the window. She felt a strange, hollow ache in her chest. She had what she wanted. Her sister was safe, receiving the best endocrinology care in the city. Her bank account had more money than she had ever seen in her life. But she was trapped in a glass cage. She was the boss's ghost. The staff terrified her. The men in suits deferred to her, stepping out of her way in the hallways with their eyes lowered. They whispered about what she must have done to Chloe to earn such a sudden, meteoric rise in the household hierarchy. They thought she was ruthless. They didn't know she threw up in the sink the first 3 mornings she woke up in the guest wing. Dominic straightened up and turned to Nora, the new physical therapist. "Starts tomorrow at 9, Nora said, her voice steady, professional. She had learned to bury the tremble. I ran his background twice. He's clean, but I'll be in the room for the first 3 sessions. Dominic nodded slowly. Good. He walked toward the door but paused near the window, standing just a few feet from Nora. The oppressive weight of his presence still made her skin prickle. "You look tired, Nora," he noted, his voice low. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Too quickly. Dominic looked out the window, at the sweeping lawns of the estate. People in our world don't sleep well. It's the price of admission. "I'm not in your world, Mr. Russo," Nora said. It was a stupid, risky thing to say, but the words slipped out before she could catch them. Dominic turned his head slowly. The icy eyes bored into hers. For a second, she thought she saw a flicker of dark amusement. "Aren't you?" he asked quietly. He gestured toward the room, toward the tablet in her hands, toward the 2 armed men waiting by the door. "You decide who touches her. You decide who stays. You dictate the rules in this house now, Nora. You're the gatekeeper." He stepped closer, the smell of gun oil and bergamot washing over her. "You threw a punch in my house. You survived it. You took the money. You're not a maid anymore." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a rough whisper that only she could hear. "You're one of us now. Stop pretending you're clean." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked out of the room, the 2 suits following him like shadows. The heavy oak doors clicked shut. Nora stood frozen by the window. The tablet felt incredibly heavy in her hands. She looked down at her own reflection in the darkened glass of the window pane. She looked cold. She looked untouchable. She looked exactly like the kind of woman who belonged in this house. Nora turned her back to the window. She walked over to the nightstand, picked up a fresh glass of iced water, and sat in the chair next to Beatrice. She carefully slipped her arm beneath the old woman's neck, supporting her head, and brought the glass to her lips. "Drink," Nora whispered softly, the only trace of humanity left in her voice. "Drink it slowly. I'm right here." Beatrice drank. The water was cold, and the room was quiet, and Nora knew, with a sickening certainty, she was never going to leave. The invisible maid didn't just survive the mafia's cruelty, she became the silent ruler of its darkest corners. Power always comes with a price, and Nora's soul was the currency. Did she make the right choice, or is she destined to become the very monster she fought against? If this raw, gritty story kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button, share it with fellow drama lovers, and subscribe for more intense, unpredictable narratives.